For every Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan, there were dozens of talented players who carved out respectable careers bouncing between teams, contributing wherever they landed. Tony Campbell was one of those players, a skilled guard who spent over a decade in the league, experiencing everything from championship runs to expansion team growing pains. Tony Campbell's basketball story begins in Columbus, Ohio, where he spent 4 years with the Ohio State Buckeyes. During his college career from 1980 to 1984, Campbell developed into a reliable scorer and playmaker. The Big Ten was no joke during those years, and playing in that competitive environment prepared him well for what lay ahead. College basketball in the early 1980s was a different animal than today's one-and-done culture. Players like Campbell had 4 full years to mature, both physically and mentally. By his senior year, he had established himself as someone NBA scouts were keeping an eye on. Not necessarily a lottery pick, but a solid prospect who could contribute at the next level. The Detroit Pistons selected Campbell in the 1984 NBA draft, and he walked into one of the most intense basketball environments in the league. This was the era of the Bad Boys Pistons, with Isaiah Thomas running the show and Bill Laimbeer patrolling the paint. The team was building toward what would become back-to-back championships in 1989 and 1990. For a young player like Campbell, Detroit was both a blessing and a challenge. On one hand, he was learning from some of the toughest, most competitive players in the game. The Pistons' practice sessions were legendary for their intensity. If you could survive those, you could handle anything the NBA threw at you. On the other hand, breaking into the rotation on a team loaded with talent wasn't easy. Campbell spent 3 seasons in Detroit, playing a supporting role on teams that were steadily improving. He got to experience playoff basketball and see what it took to build a championship culture. The Pistons were all about defense, toughness, and team-first basketball, lessons that would serve Campbell well throughout his career. In 1987, Campbell made the move from the gritty, blue-collar Pistons to the glamorous Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers were the polar opposite of Detroit in almost every way. Where the Pistons were all about grinding it out, the Lakers were Showtime, fast breaks, highlight reels, and Hollywood glitz. Playing alongside Magic Johnson had to be a surreal experience for Campbell. Here was a player who could make everyone around him better, who saw passes that others couldn't even imagine. The Lakers' up-tempo style was perfect for a player like Campbell, who had the athleticism to run the floor and the shooting ability to knock down open looks. During his 2 seasons in Los Angeles, Campbell got to see championship basketball from the other side. The Lakers won it all in 1988, giving Campbell his first and only NBA championship ring. Being part of that Lakers team, even in a reserve role, meant experiencing one of the most iconic eras in NBA history. Those Lakers teams were special, not just because of their talent, but because of how they played the game with such joy and flair. The NBA landscape changed dramatically in 1989 with the addition of new franchises, and Campbell found himself selected by the Minnesota Timberwolves in the expansion draft. This was perhaps the most defining period of his career. Going from a championship team to an expansion franchise was jarring, but it also represented an incredible opportunity. In Minnesota, Campbell wasn't just another role player. He was one of the go-to guys. The Timberwolves needed players who could score, and Campbell delivered. His best statistical season came during his time in Minnesota, where he averaged over 23 points per game in the 1989-90 season. For a player who had spent most of his career coming off the bench, being the focal point of an offense was both liberating and challenging. The Timberwolves were building from scratch, and Campbell was part of that foundation. The losses piled up. That's just the reality of expansion teams. But Campbell proved he could be a legitimate NBA scorer when given the opportunity. Those Minnesota years showed what he was truly capable of when not playing in the shadow of superstars. After 3 seasons in Minnesota, Campbell headed to New York to join the Knicks. This was during Pat Riley's tenure as head coach, when the Knicks were one of the most physical, defensive-minded teams in the league. Players like Patrick Ewing, Charles Oakley, and Anthony Mason set the tone for a franchise that prided itself on toughness. Campbell's role with the Knicks was different from what he'd experienced in Minnesota. He was back to being more of a complementary player, but his veteran experience was valuable on a team with championship aspirations. The Knicks were consistently one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference during Campbell's time there, making deep playoff runs and giving the Michael Jordan-led Bulls all they could handle. Campbell's time with the Dallas Mavericks was relatively brief, overlapping with his Knicks tenure during the 1993-94 season. This was during a transitional period for the Mavericks, who were trying to find their identity in the competitive Western Conference. While his Dallas experience was short, it demonstrated Campbell's adaptability, his ability to come into a new situation and contribute immediately. By this point in his career, He was a true professional who understood his role and executed it without complaint. Campbell's NBA journey concluded with the Cleveland Cavaliers during the 1994-95 season. Cleveland was another franchise in transition, and Campbell brought veteran leadership to a young team. The Cavaliers provided a fitting end to Campbell's career, a chance to pass on his knowledge and experience to the next generation while still contributing on the court. Tony Campbell's 11-year NBA career tells the story of professional basketball in the 1980s and early 1990s. He experienced the league from multiple perspectives, as a role player on championship teams, as a featured scorer on expansion franchises, and as a veteran presence on rebuilding clubs. What made Campbell special wasn't necessarily his individual accolades or statistics, though his 23-point average in Minnesota shows he could fill it up when needed. Instead, his value lay in his adaptability, professionalism, and basketball intelligence. He understood that success in the NBA often meant accepting whatever role would help the team win. Campbell's journey also illustrates how much the NBA changed during his career. He entered the league when there were 23 teams and finished when there were 27. He played in an era when players typically stayed with teams longer, but he also experienced the increased player movement that would become commonplace. For fans of basketball history, Tony Campbell represents something important: the solid, reliable professional who formed the backbone of the league. Not every player can be a superstar, but the NBA has always needed players like Campbell who brought skill, experience, and leadership wherever they went. His career may not make the highlight reels, but it perfectly captures the journey of a true basketball professional during one of the most exciting eras in NBA history. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate you guys. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and stay safe.